Broadcast is now starting.
Testing.
All
On
attendees
the
are in
right
listen
side,
only
if you're
mode.
able to hear me, if you're able to see the screen, I'm testing right now. You should start to hear something, perhaps see a screen. If you're in this webinar, on the right side there is a chat button. I want to make sure that it's actually working for you. So can anybody hear me or can anybody see the screen? On the right side, if you have the chat button and if you can hear me, go ahead and just type in a message. And hopefully you can actually hear me. So I should be presenting my screen. And I'll just send another message. Testing. And we are recording. So all of this troubleshooting should actually be available on the screen as well. Oh, okay. Ellen can hear me. Kate can hear me. Sunita can hear me. Excellent. So I have no idea why we keep getting these weird interruptions with our webinars. I had actually been broadcasting for about 6 minutes before somebody said that on your side, there's no video or no audio coming through. So I had to disconnect and then reconnect. So apologies if you had stopped by. So let's get this presentation underway. We're doing a live demo. And let me bring up this main screen. And I'll minimize this window. There we are. And I'll maximize the PowerPoint. So thank you for attending. My name's Noah. Apologies if you've been sitting on a blank screen, and apologies, of course, last week, because I understand a number of you had also signed up for last week's webinar, which is this week's webinar. There were just technical issues, and it looks like those technical issues carried over. So for today, we're going to talk about some popular how-tos. If you've never attended a webinar or if you just want to find out the rules, so this webinar is fairly short. It's about 30 minutes. We'll spend some time taking some questions at the end. My microphone is on. You should be able to see the screen that I'm looking at. And of course, your speakers should be on so that you can hear me. And we'll have some time set aside for questions again. So you can always reach out to us on our Facebook page, and my contact information will be at the end of the presentation in case you have a follow-up question. So the learning outcomes. So our help desk, we're here 24 hours, 7 days a week, and we take technical questions or we take some basic how-to questions. So I gathered a few of the more common how-to questions from the help desk. So we're going to look at some basics that you should know. Perhaps it's been a long time since you've used shortcuts or since you've configured your staff or the system, so you might have forgotten some of these things. So today we're going to focus on a few basic things. Configuring the staff, working with schedules and attendance, working with services if you decide that you want to allow break times for processing of chemical or color, and of course, working with capabilities. So let's jump into it. We're going to do a live demo on an actual database. So how do you add an employee? How do you assign a level? How do you assign a commission? And of course, how do you assign security to that employee? So we're going to launch an actual shortcuts that I have open in the background. So let's go back and let's launch shortcuts. Okay, so on the main screen, the majority of you are usually on this appointment book screen when you need to add a new staff member. So we need to add another staff member here. On the right side, if you're logged in as the administrator, you go down to the setup button on the bottom right corner. And once you're in setup, you go to the employee button. So whenever you have a new staff member, on the bottom left corner, we'll press new and we'll add our new employee. So Mary is our new employee. I'll put in a first name, then a last name. And on the left side of the screen, if you have a level system, in your salon or your spa or even your barbershop, this is where you tell shortcuts what level should they be either paid at, or this connects to the duration of time for their services. So if Mary's my new employee, perhaps she is at the junior level. So however long juniors take to perform a service, or whatever we charge for the junior level, this is now going to be applied to Mary. Underneath that, where it says commission. So if Mary should be getting a commission based on her service or her retail or both, this is where I choose what commission should she be receiving. Now, if Mary perhaps was my receptionist and instead of being a commission person, she's going to be an hourly employee, then on the bottom left corner, this is where I could set her hourly rate. But in this case, she is a junior stylist and she should be getting a 45% commission. So this is how we add an employee and choose a certain level or choose a certain commission. But this is not really complete until I tell shortcuts what their security pin is. So this is ultimately how Mary is able to log in and actually start using shortcuts. So on the bottom center, I'll press the pin button, and if Mary were here, I could have her type in a pin, or I'll just assign her a pin. So I'll go something easy, 9876. When I press done, shortcuts will ask me to confirm that pin. So again, 9876. And I hope when you add your employees, you don't choose something so easy. So we've been able to add an employee, assign a level, assign a commission, and even give them a security pin. Now, if you've never created a level, or if you're interested in creating a level system for your staff, perhaps you've had employees there that have been there long enough that you have a seniority system going on. Or perhaps your most efficient employees are the ones that have been there the longest. Then you might want to start separating them based on efficiency or help with your productivity and your scheduling. So to create a level system, from the employee screen, there is a little button on the bottom right corner. It has a wrench on it and it says levels. When you press it, by default, there are no levels in shortcuts. So what you would do is on the bottom left corner, just like adding a staff member, you would press new and create a level. So in this case, I've already created 4 levels: apprentice, junior, senior, and master. So you can create as many levels as you want. There is no limit, and you can attach that level to each employee. Some of our locations, perhaps they only have 3 or 4 staff members. Instead of creating the level system that I have, they'll just literally name the level after the name of the employee. So you are welcome to do that as well. Once you create your levels, on the left side, this is where you tag shortcuts and you tell it what level should the employee be paid at or their time be for their services. So we'll save that change. So we've added staff members, we've chosen levels or commissions, we've assigned pins. So just because you add a pin doesn't mean the employee necessarily has permission to use shortcuts. So to make sure that every staff member has the correct level of permission, this is where you return to the setup button on the right side and you go down to configuration. Once you're in configuration, on the left side of the screen, there's a little button that says General. We're going to go to the General button. And your very first button under General is Security. So for shortcuts, the majority of you usually see 4 basic levels: owner, manager, employee, and receptionist. So for the staff that you have, you need to tell shortcuts what level of permission should these people have. On the far left side, you would click the block next to their name and drag them up or down and place them in the order of permission they should have. So what exactly are these differences between owner, manager, employee, and receptionist? At the top of the screen, there's a tab next to the one that says levels that says access. And this is where Shortcuts spells out exactly what level of permission a person should have. As you can see, somebody at the owner level has full access to everything. These check marks on the right side represent everything that an owner has access to. Now, the differences start happening when you go down to manager, for example. So a manager has some of the configuration options taken away from them. The biggest difference happens between employee and receptionist. If you notice, as soon as I selected employee, a lot of the permissions have been removed for them. An employee technically is somebody that works behind the chair and rarely ever uses shortcuts. The only time they would have access to shortcuts is if this staff person is supposed to clock in and clock out, and that's about it. An employee does not have permission to add a new customer. They do not have permission to put in an appointment or even use point of sale. Those permissions would be reserved for a receptionist. So keep it in mind, if you have a smaller salon or a smaller barber shop and you have 2 or 3 staff members that technically should be able to add new customers and also use point of sale, then you may want to give them receptionist permission. Now, this is not set in stone. On the right side, you can still choose any level and fine-tune those permissions. So you can take away and add those permissions. Not only that, perhaps you don't like the naming convention. So you don't like the name receptionist. So you can change that, and instead of receptionist, I'm just going to call this employee plus. So that means whoever is under the employee plus level of permissions can check people in and out. So I'll move Eli from employee to employee plus. So just like Courtney, he can now do checkouts. So I hope that makes sense. On the right side, if you have any questions, we do have a chat thing. So make sure to start saving some questions or marking some questions, and we'll review them at the end. So this is how you add staff, assign a level, assign a commission, and of course, give them security, give them a PIN and a security level. So that is the first portion of the how-to. So the next thing, now that you have your staff entered in shortcuts, how do you put in a schedule for them? How do you copy that schedule? How do you block out time? And of course, how do you fix attendance in case you have an hourly employee and they forget to clock in or clock out? So we'll return back to shortcuts. We're still under the setup button on the right side, and we're still under the employees screen. So from here, if I just added a new employee, Mary in this case, on the bottom right, I need to add her schedule. When is she actually working? Now, by default, whichever employee was currently selected, it will be their screen only. So in this case, Mary has no hours. I need to choose for at least 1 week what her schedule should be. Now, even though we're on Tuesday, I'm going to go to yesterday, October 22nd, and I'm going to select that day under her column and tell shortcuts from when to when is she working. Well, Mary is in from 9 to 6. So that is considered a normal shift. This is when she's working. So I'll say 9 to 6 and press done. And what about today? Again, Tuesday, she works 9 to 6. That is her normal shift. However, she's off tomorrow. Now, a lot of locations that have shortcuts, they just leave those days blank. They'll ignore it and go to Thursday when she returns. I would never advise to leave a day blank. If she's not working that day, go ahead and tell shortcuts. We'll click on Wednesday, And on the right side, I'll actually tell Shortcuts this is her day off. Now, the reason that's important is because if you have online booking or self-check-in, Shortcuts looks at your staff availability. And if you forget to tell Shortcuts when a staff member is actually in or not, and your business is open, Shortcuts may assume, oh, okay, well, you never told me they're not working today, but the business is open, so technically I could allow a customer to book this employee on that day. But as soon as I do this, as soon as I say day off, Shortcuts knows absolutely this employee is not working that day. Do not allow customers to try to book them online. So this is where it's important. So now it actually shows up in a different color. So she is scheduled off for tomorrow, but she does return on Thursday, and on Thursday, again, 9 to 6. She's in on Friday, 9 to 6. And Saturday, she is in at 12 in the afternoon to 6. And Sunday, again, 12 to 3. So I have entered a 1-week schedule for Mary. And more or less, this is going to be her schedule until the end of the year. So to copy a schedule in Shortcuts, and I know a number of you are getting your pens and pencils out, so this is something that usually you have a receptionist do, but just for review, we're on the employee window, we're on the schedule window. To copy a schedule, on the top left corner, you can press the button that says Mark Cells, and that's on the top left, it's next to Mary's name. As soon as I do that, Shortcuts wants to know what is the first cell, or what is the first schedule day in her week. Well, that was yesterday. So I'll click that 9 to 6. That lines up with Monday. And then Shortcut says, what's the second cell? The second cell is technically the last day of the week, which would be Sunday. So I'll click Monday, and my second cell is Sunday. So did you notice how everything in between just got highlighted? When that happens, you can right-click, and when you right-click on that highlighted area, you can press Schedule Until. So when you press Schedule Until, Shortcut says, when does this shift schedule end? Well, I could click the 4th, so it's a schedule for 2 weeks, or I can use my pull-down menu, and I can choose December, and choose the last Sunday in December. In this case, it's the 30th. Well, maybe I want to pull it into the new year. So I'll say the last Sunday in her schedule is actually January 6th, 2019. So I'll press the 6th. And if you notice on the left, her schedule from this week has now been copied again and again and again, every week until January 6th. Now, once I copy the schedule, this is something important. On the top left corner, you want to press Unmark Cells. Otherwise, Shortcuts thinks that you still want to copy her schedule again and again. So I'll press Unmark Cells. And it no longer highlights that area. So that was for Mary. So I just copied Mary's schedule, and I deleted her name on Search Employee. So now I see everybody's schedule. So I notice nobody else has a schedule. So I need to make sure that when I get a moment, I do the same process for every one of my staff members. I choose what days they're working, what days they're not working, and of course, mark out all of those days for a week. So if you had 2 or more staff members that more or less had the same schedule, there is a fast way to copy this information. So in this case, Eli and Angela actually have the same hours. They're here pretty much every day except Tuesdays. So I just set Eli's schedule for 1 week. I'll press the Mark Cells button, just like I did for Mary, and I'll mark his Monday through Sunday. But instead of scheduling him forward, I want to copy his highlighted area over to Angela's column. So once I highlight Monday through Sunday, on my keyboard, I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I'm just going to left click and drag. And do you notice how it allows me to drag his schedule from one person to another? So I'm just going to drag it over to Angela. And I can even do the same thing. I can drag his schedule over to Steve. So perhaps all three of those employees share the same schedule. So once I do that, don't forget to press Unmarked Cells on the top left corner. So perhaps Steve is actually working on Tuesday. I'll change that. But he is off on Friday. So it's just a minor change. So rather than having to go one day at a time for Steve, I copied the schedule over and I just changed one day off for one day on. So I have 3 staff members now that all have the same schedule. If I decide that's going to be their schedule for the next month or the next 2 months or the next 2 years, I can copy all 3 of them at the same time. So to do that, again, I would press Mark Cells, and I can start with Eli's Monday and diagonally go down to Steve's Sunday. Everything in between, including Courtney's blank column, gets highlighted. Once it's highlighted, if I right-click, I can tell Shortcuts to copy their schedule until, just like Mary, I'm going to copy it until the 6th of next year. And then I can press Unmarked Cells. So this is how you create a schedule, how you copy a schedule, either between staff members or copy a schedule going forwards. Now, for some of the locations we work with, they actually have staff that alternate on weekends. So perhaps one Saturday they're in, one Saturday they're not. So we can absolutely do that here. For the case of Courtney, she is very much an employee that is like that. So she's here every day of the week, but she alternates her Saturdays. This week, her Saturday is off. So I'll mark it off. And she is also off on Sunday. So normally, I can mark those cells and I can just use Alt and copy it to next week. However, next week, she is actually working Saturday. So I'll make her available next Saturday. So this week, Shortcuts knows she's off Saturday and Sunday. Next week, she's available Saturday, but still off Sunday. Now I need to tell Shortcuts I want to copy her 2-week schedule going forwards. So I'll press Mark Cells again, and I'll choose Monday through not this Sunday, but the following Sunday. So it highlights a 2-week schedule. Now I can right-click and tell Shortcuts we're going to repeat her 2-week schedule until the end of December or the start of January. And there it is. So I started with a completely blank schedule, and now my staff is actually scheduled for the next few months. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense now. So that's as far as making sure that your staff schedules are in there. We're under Employees and the Schedule button. For those that have to clock in, for your hourly staff members, when they're on the main window, if Shortcuts is not currently set up to auto clock on employees, then on the right side, there's a button that says Performance. When a staff member goes to Shortcuts, they'll press the Performance button, And depending on what level of permission they have, on the left side, usually they only see themselves, but if they have receptionist permission, they may be able to see other staff members. So what that person will do is click on their name and then press clock on. And we'll clock Mary on right now. And that's it. So if you notice on the appointment book, she has a little clock next to her name. So it shows us, oh, Mary is actually working right now. At the end of the day, of course, you'll return to performance. Mary will choose her name, and she will clock off. So in this case, Mary has only been on the clock for 1 minute. So this is how staff clocks in and clocks out. They will click on their performance button and then press the clock on or clock off button. Now, in the event of something like Mary, she accidentally clocks off right away. So we need to adjust her attendance. We need to tell Shortcuts, she wasn't logged in for a minute, she actually should have been logged in for an hour or more. This is usually reserved for administrators. On the right side, to adjust an employee's attendance, the times that they actually clocked in and out, you're going to go to the Tools button. So this is protected by security. Most staff does not see the option for attendance. So there's a button called Attendance. It has a little person with a check mark. And if we notice, Mary is the only person that's on here because Mary is the only employee that has clocked in and clocked out. So it shows me she clocked in at 9:39 a.m. and she clocked off at 9:40. So she was barely in for a minute or two. So there's a couple of ways I can fix this. I can click on her clock on time, and I can actually tell Shortcuts, actually, she was in at 7:30 this morning. And press done. And Shortcuts automatically adjust the hours that she was working. Or I can just click on the hour button and just type in a number. Well, actually, she was just here 2 hours. Now, this is if Mary accidentally clocked in and clocked out too soon. But what happens if Mary forgot to clock in yesterday? So on this window, the attendance window, you can actually add what's called a shift. So for Mary, she was actually here all day yesterday, and I need to tell Shortcuts that. So on this window, at the bottom, I'll press the New button after choosing Mary, and Shortcuts will ask me, do I want to add a shift type for Mary? So yes. When was she in? She was in on Monday. From what time to what time? Mary was in from 9 to 4. And done. So now I have 2 entries for Mary. She was in yesterday, and she was in for just a couple of hours this morning. So if you have a staff member that forgot to clock in, and you go to attendance, and you notice that staff member is not in here, so that you can't fix their attendance, how do you do that? How do you deal with that? So in this case, Steve, he also forgot to clock in and clock out. So to fix it in attendance, we need to create at least 1 entry. So we can go to the Performance button, choose Steve, clock him in, and then clock him off, even though he literally only clocked on for a second. Now that Shortcuts recognizes Steve has an entry, we can go to Tools and Attendance, and Shortcuts says, okay, Steve is now clocked in and clocked out. Do you want to fix his day or his time? Yes, I do. He was supposed to be clocked in this morning, just like Mary, at 7:30. And I'll choose Steve's name. I'll add a shift for him, and I'll choose yesterday as well. He was in from 9 to 3. So now both of my employees now have corrected entries. So I hope this makes a little bit more sense. So this is how you do both things. Add a schedule for your staff And if you have hourly or employees that you need to track their hours, have them clock in with the performance button. We'll return back to our PowerPoint. So blocking out time. There's a few ways to do that. If you're using the appointment book, the easiest way to block out time is by using a task. So on the main window, on your appointment book screen, let's say Courtney or Steve, they're going to go on break or they're going to take an early lunch. You would click that time as if you're making an appointment for them. So at 11 o'clock, Courtney's going to take an early lunch. As soon as you click that empty space, Shortcuts brings up our customer list. If you notice at the very top of the client list, there's a button that says Schedule a Task. So we're going to choose Schedule a Task and press Done. There's usually 3 tasks by default in Shortcuts. They're either assisting somebody, taking a lunch, or going to a meeting. Whenever you choose any one of these, you can always edit the default time. So perhaps at this location, we don't have hour lunches, we have 30-minute lunches. So I'm going to change this. And of course, you're welcome to add any additional tasks here. So perhaps one of my employees has to pick up their kids from daycare. And every time they do that, that's a 40-minute round trip. But for Courtney, she's just going to lunch. So I'll choose lunch and press Done. And just like an appointment, it shows up on the screen, and it shows up in 2 shades, a light shade and a dark shade. If you remember your rules and Shortcuts, you can click and drag a task, just like an appointment, by clicking and dragging on the light shaded area. And you can make a task longer or shorter by clicking on the darker shaded area. So perhaps she really does need an hour lunch. She would just click and drag that. So that is how you block out their time. Once a task is on the appointment book, Shortcuts will treat it just like an appointment. What this means is if you have self-check-in or if you have online appointments, online booking, Shortcuts will not let a customer try to book a staff member if there's a task there. So just like an appointment, you can even set a recur. So for the case of Courtney, she takes an early lunch every day of the week. So rather than going to tomorrow and doing the same thing in the next day, I can right click on her current task, and let me tell this stupid pop-up window to go away. I can right click on her task and set a recur. And I'll tell Shortcuts, her next lunch is tomorrow, the 24th. And when does that task end? Well, she likes to take her lunch early every day, so until the end of December. So I think I put too many tasks in there now. Did I? No. So with the exception of the days that she has off, Shortcuts has blocked her out to have her lunch at 11 o'clock every day of the week. So let me exit Shortcuts and start it up again. I think I'm starting to run low on memory here. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense as far as working with attendants and blocking out employees. The easiest way really is by using a task. Okay, so now Courtney should be good for the next few weeks, if not the next few months. So we've entered our schedules, we've entered our staff, we've assigned security. So what's the next most common question that we get at the help desk? That's actually working with services that either have a level system or break times. So how do you create a level system, or how do you add break times to your services, and how do you adjust those? So again, we'll return to Shortcuts. So on the right side, we saw that under the Employees window under Setup, this is where you can create a level system. And once you create a level system, this is the window where you tell shortcuts which employee has a particular level. But on the right side, how do you tell shortcuts this level requires a different time or a different price? So under the Setup button, we're going to the Services button. So I'm going to Cuts, for example, and I'm going to the Men's Cut. So under the Men's Cut, once I decide I have a level system that requires a different time or price, I'll choose the name of that service, and on the bottom right corner, there's a button that says Details, and it has a wrench on it. So this is the way that I show the people that I work with how to remember that button. In Shortcuts, if you need to fix a name, a time, or a price of a service, look for the wrench. The wrench will help you fix it. So I'm going to press the Details wrench for the Men's Cut, and it shows me my default time and my default price. Well, I decide, nope, I've been in business for a long time, and I want to reward my senior staff because they're very efficient. So I'll say, my senior or my master stylist should actually be getting $20 for the Men's Cut. My senior should be getting $18 for the haircut. My junior, well, my junior actually gets the default price. And my apprentice, well, my apprentice isn't quite there yet. They'll charge $11 for that haircut. Notice I was able to change the price for every level without having to press save in between. So Shortcuts will automatically save your changes after you pull this menu down. Now, for others, that's just to adjust the price. For a woman's cut, I'll go to the Details for that. And again, I'll go to Senior or Master first. So a master stylist will say it's $45 is actually what they charge. But they're very efficient. They can actually do the service a little bit faster. So I'll say it's 45 minutes. The senior, well, they charge $35. And they're not yet as efficient, perhaps they're 50 minutes. Then the junior is actually the default price, but the apprentice, well, the apprentice takes them a little bit longer. We'll say 75 minutes. And their price, maybe it's $15. So this is how you tell Shortcuts a time or a price depends on the level of the employee that the customer gets. If you have online booking, you do have the option to have Shortcuts show when the customer is choosing an employee if they are at a certain level and what price do they charge for a service. For most locations, they usually leave that option off and the customer just chooses the staff member without necessarily knowing what their seniority level is. So that's how you adjust an individual level time or level price. Now for some services, we're going to go into something a little bit more complex. I'm going to Other, and I'm going to do some basic hair color. So I'll press New, and in this case, the majority of my customers are male, so maybe I want to offer some gray blending. So, like most color, this is actually a two-step process. The first block is my application. So, the application time is about 15 minutes, and it takes about 15 minutes to process. Now, for other color services, your highlights, your tones, things like that, your processing time may be 30 minutes, 45 minutes. So just keep that in mind. And my default sell price for this, I'll say it's $25. So that's the first step. I need to apply my color and then give it 15 minutes to process. The second block is actually my finishing block. And in this case, I could literally label it finishing, or I could label it something else. So perhaps the second part is actually just a shampoo. And that is an additional 15 minutes, 0 on the break. My price is included on the first line, 0 cost, 0 points. So I will press done, and I've introduced a new service, gray blending, and Shortcuts recognizes this is a two-step process or a two-block process. So up until now, every service that I've had is just a one-block service, one solid block of time, with the exception of my blending. So how does that show up in the appointment book? If Mary is going to do a gray blending service, I'll choose her column. I'll bring in my test customer, and this is a new client. So what service is she doing? She's doing one of my other services, gray blending. So now if you notice, there is a gap of time available between the application and the shampoo. If you were a salon that allowed customers to double book, so perhaps she could do a really quick beard trim or edge up or something in that gap, she would be able to click on that and then put another appointment there. Some salons or some stylists are very particular about not allowing customers to do that. In cases like that, you can always drag the application time to fill up that spot so that nobody tries to book you then. So it depends on your salon or your barbershop how your staff feels about breaking the services apart into two blocks. And that break is because you actually set in a break time on the service. One of the questions that the help desk commonly gets is, can I have different break times for different staff members? And the answer to that is no. Shortcuts recognizes that if you're dealing with a color or a chemical service, there is a sort of universal time that it takes for it to process. It doesn't matter how efficient the employee is, that chemical will always take the same amount of time to process. So as soon as you try to change this, and let's say I go to the master level, I'd say, well, you know what? It only takes them 10 minutes to process. Well, that's not correct. If it takes them 10 minutes, the chemical takes 10 minutes for everybody, not just the master level. So you notice how it automatically changed it for everybody? So just keep that in mind. As soon as you assign a break time, that is a universal. You can still change the default application time, and you can still change the sell price, but that break is a universal break. I hope that clears things up for you. So we've talked about adding breaks, creating levels, and adjusting those times and prices. So the last thing we're going to look at today is adding capabilities for services and employees. So this sort of works hand in hand with everything we've just looked at. So we've told Shortcuts certain staff members are working on certain days. We've told Shortcuts that certain staff members charge a little bit more or take a little bit less time to perform a service. But in some cases, you have staff members that only perform certain services. So in this case, this is where you go to the capabilities option. We're still under the setup button, and we're going to capabilities. So in this case, there are no default capabilities in Shortcuts. You have to add them. And it's very easy to create a capability. So at the bottom, I'm going to add a new capability. What am I going to call this? I could say this is the team that does color services or chemical services. For my gray blending, I'm just going to say this is a color service. So this is the name of my capability. On the bottom center of the screen, I'm going to tell Shortcuts which employees fall under this capability. Well, Mary can do this, Angela can do this, and Eli can do this. But I excluded Steve. Steve is the only employee that's not allowed to perform this service. So once I've chosen their names, I'll press Add to add them. And then I'll press Done. So Shortcuts will warn me. Now that I have my staff members, please choose at least one service that they can perform. So at the bottom of the window, I'll press the Service button. I'll go to my Other, and I'll say these three are the only people allowed to do gray blending. So I'll press Add. And Done. So now Shortcuts recognizes these three are the only ones allowed to do this. This comes in handy. If I allow customers to book gray blending online, then they will only be able to book it with one of these three employees. So Steve's name will never show up. So keep this in mind. If you're a barber shop and you have certain employees that have a license that allows them to do straight razor services, create a capability list for them. If you have a high-end salon and you have a color team and you have a cut team and you don't want your color team to get booked for a kid's haircut, then create a capability list and exclude your color team from being bookable for a kid's haircut. So this is how this works with your scheduling, with your levels, and all of this synchronizes for online services so that only the staff that's supposed to be booked can be booked. So this brings us full circle. So these are some of the more common how-tos that the help desk gets. You should now be able to do some basic functions and Shortcuts. Configure your staff, add your schedules, adjust your attendance, add break times, or work with service levels, and of course, add capabilities. So now we're opening up the floor for a question and answer session. And I think in order to see the questions, I need to go back to my full control panel. So on the right side of your screen, there is a little chat window. If anybody has a question, go ahead and just type in a message. Otherwise, I will release this video a little bit later today so that you can revisit all of these steps. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to us. You can send us an email or even post a question on Facebook, and we'll get back to you on it. Of course, if you have any topics for webinars or any other how-tos, just let us know, and we can always put together another webinar for you. So on the right side, let me take a look. So the good thing is people can see, and hopefully people have been able to hear the entire presentation. Set and forget email design. That is a good question. That might be a topic. Vicky asked the question, how about doing a webinar on set and forget email design? So if you're using that, that's an excellent topic. So we might visit that in the future, especially since the holidays are coming up. You probably want to get your campaigns ready for that. So we probably will do a webinar on that before the holidays get here. Okay, any other questions? And I'm checking the chat button on the bottom right side. No, I'm pretty sure everybody has fallen asleep now. That's good for me. So if you're still paying attention, here is our contact information. So you can always reach us at education@shortcuts.net. You can always follow us on Facebook, post your questions on Facebook, we will review them. And of course, give us a call. So Vicky came up with a great idea. So we might be looking at GCast on the next one. So we have another question from Kate. Everything makes a little bit more sense now. So Kate's going to probably review this video, review the lessons. If anything wasn't clear, or if there's a step you think that we need to review, just let us know. We'll always go back and take another look at this. So thank you all for attending. I do apologize for getting this presentation and, of course, last week's presentation off to a rocky start. We'll try to have things a little bit more smoothly sailing from now on, now that we know what some of our technical glitches are. So thank you all for attending. I'm going to wrap this one up, and the video will be available a little bit later today for your review. Have a great day, everybody.